What's up, y'all? This is your boy Cecil Williams, aka Stinger, here to drop some of the information on y'all. Since that fool Silver don't know shit but what's going on in his little world. Knowledge is the order of business in this segment, and what better way to start business off other than by giving y'all an overview of the organization that runs it all. Oh yes, I'm talking about our intergalactic authority, our governing body, the United Nations, aka the UN. Now I understand that to some of y'all this information may come as a shock, being a one world government and all. So I'll give you 5 seconds to grieve on that, which happened to have started when I said the number 5, which means the time's up, bitches. The UN's history is a given. You all should know it. It was founded in the 20th century after the Second World War in order to prevent any one nation, such as Nazi Germany perhaps, from gaining as much power as it had during the 1940s. Now skipping on to the 21st century, or more specifically the mid-21st century, it seemed that those in positions of authority had become power hungry, and as first world nations saw separations between race, religion, sexual orientation or preference, and more importantly, the divide between the common folk and the elite. Countries like the United States slowly but clearly showed signs of transitioning into a police state. Soon, revolts and protests became revolutions, and revolutions became war on a global scale, becoming what we now call the Third World War. It was a worldwide revolution which pitted the larger numbered militia united from many countries against the more organized and government-funded military of their respective nations, along with their loyalists. It had gotten to the point where national leaders were seriously considering the use of nuclear weapons, and everyone knew how that was going to end. The world itself. All the while, a group consisting of some of the world's richest, intelligent, and influential people of the time gathered together in hopes of putting an end to worldwide violence, be it lethal or non-lethal. Although it wouldn't solve 100% of the world's issues, it would be one hell of a start. Without the issues of violence and guaranteed protection of all human life, other issues would have greater importance than it did at the time. This resulted in an invention called the Vespa. Trillions upon trillions of microscopic hornets using nano-robotic technology and nuclear power as an energy source. The Hornets were given advanced artificial intelligence and were capable of near light speed. This technology was the flagship of its manufacturer, also bearing the same name, Vespa Incorporated, or Vespa Inc. Vespa Inc. was secretly hidden and funded by a group known only at the time as the Order of Modern Knighthood. As the entire planet descended into war, there were only 30 men and women standing in between, meaning there was about 30 men and women against at least 10 billion altogether. They were called the Mod Knights and were trained in arts of combat, warfare, and also trained to control large numbers of Vespa called swarms, using magnetic and electromagnetic technology. The Mod Knights were commanded by their 10 founders who had funded Vespa Inc. 4 of those founders even became Mod Knights themselves. One of them, then and currently known as Kenny Littlewing, was selected as their general and would lead their crusade for world peace. With Kenny leading the front, they took their warriors to the opposite ends of the earth in order to bring the ongoing wars to an end. Using their Vespa swarms and advanced weaponry made of iron and magnetite, the Mod Knights, working in either groups of 2 or 3, swiftly dealt with the militia while they were encamped. Although the militia vastly outnumbered the Knights, they had very little artillery, lacked military experience, and primarily operated on foot, so it was a given that they was gonna get their ass whooped. The Mod Knights confiscated all of their weapons, causing them all to surrender, and they even won them over to their cause after campaigning for world peace. They even allowed some of the members of the militia to be selected and trained by the Knights once the war was over. When they were faced against the military backed by their governments, the Mod Knights were able to completely cover their tanks with their Vespa, and they pulled out the operators while converting the tank matter into material to increase the number of their swarms. They even protected the now unarmed militia, which were still encamped, from the National Air Forces who had sent their aircrafts to attack. They rendered the carriers ineffective and even safely brought the pilots down where they would be next to surrender. When the threat of a nuclear attack surfaced, the Knights would not only refuse to surrender, but bait the military bases to launch their warheads. Left with no other choice, it seemed, the governments of their respective nations released their nuclear warheads. As soon as the warheads were seen in the air, the Knights provided a protective screen of Vespa, covering themselves and those around them, nearly blackening the sky with Vespa swarms. The explosions were caught at a safe distance, away from the people, which saved billions of lives. The Mod Knights would then persuade the governments of their respective nations to surrender, stating that they only wanted peace and that their actions hadn't claimed a single life during the current time of strife, while there were casualties caused by both sides, meaning the elites as well as the common folk. Understanding that they couldn't win against this small group of warriors and their advanced weaponry, the government, their armies, as well as the common folk fighting against them, gave their words to stop the bloodshed, and the Third World War had been brought to an end. Yay, Mod Knights. Years later, the Knights would fight in a war which actually required them to do some work, because their enemy was no longer a human one, but the manifestation of entities using the overabundance of Vespa as vessels. This would become known as the Modern Dark Age. The top minds at Vespa, one name standing out in particular being Reinvade Pice, surmised that as human beings carried with them an electromagnetic field, their energy was contained and stored inside of the earth when they died. So every deed committed, whether good or bad, had been stored deep within the planet, manifesting in beings born out of history, folklore, and more. The manifestations born from malevolent energy, which were pretty much baddies fresh out of any horror story that you could possibly name, used the Vespa to wreak havoc and terror among mankind, while the manifestations of the benevolent energy, go figure, were outnumbered by their evil counterparts and were too afraid to seek refuge with the humans for fear of being attacked by them, knowing full well that men wouldn't be able to discern the difference between the good ones and the bad ones, considering that they had no definitive features, because the Vespa was pretty much one color, black. You couldn't make out their faces whether or not they were good manifestations or bad manifestations. It would be impossible to tell. The Knights had grown in number, but their efforts only ended in stalemates, which caused casualties on the human side during battles. It wasn't until Little Wing and his honor guard went on a journey, searching the darkest corners of the earth in order to find materials that could be used as a weapon against the enemy. During their journey, they encountered the more benevolent manifestations of Vespa, taking the form of angels for the most part, so that they could be quickly identified as the good guys. Although they were apprehensive, the Knights were persuaded to let the good Vespa join the fight, and once the Vespa did, their combined control placed a hold on the evil Vespa, as the good would combine with their evil counterparts, rendering their evil nature almost non-existent, allowing the Vespa to once again go and remain under human control. But this time, the Vespa's AI developed a conscience, allowing them to not only follow their human counterparts' command, but to act freely in doing so. The Vespa and the Mod Knights developed a bond comparable to parent and child. Little Wing decided from that point on that the number of Vespa will have to be proportional to the number of human beings controlling them, and the Angel Division was formed. Although they wouldn't be able to control as much Vespa as the Knights, they would still have a considerable amount of control, which would allow for more members to be trained in the art of wielding the Vespa. This would give the humans more control, as the ratio of Vespa to humans were now considered reasonable. The angels would be able to increase their number of Vespa in time, although their control would default to the knights whenever deemed necessary. The modern Dark Age, or the MDA, was now over, and the knights had been made the de facto world leaders for a time. But not long after, many speculations began to surface concerning the amount of power given to the Order of Modern Knighthood, or the OMK, and their angels. Even during an international time of peace, their concerns had already been considered by the OMK, who never wanted to be in such positions of power in the first place, as many of them had families, careers they loved, and the rest just enjoyed spending time holding visual over the planet, making sure that the people were protected and no harm was done to the earth. The Mod Knights decided that as their original lineup consisted of members of many different races and ethnicities, the nations divided by such qualities would have to join together, united, or else they would be brought back into the same conflict which was started by these segregations. And Little Wing declared that if the world was ever brought back into such times, not only would the Mod Knights put an end to such an uproar, but they would place such a stranglehold on the world that the people would live under a regime that would seem like a totalitarian domination. And I guarantee you that it wouldn't have been good, because all privacies would have been stripped away, and all luxuries would have been stripped away. Unhappy with the current political format, where individuals use funding and propaganda for political campaigns in order to manipulate the voters into electing corrupt officials, the OMK decided to make the choice a lot simpler for the people, stating that separation of the government and their people was another reason that started the Third World War, and we could not have that again. Candidates would be studied and assessed on their capabilities in job-like interviews, which would be broadcasted all over the world, allowing the public to determine whether or not those running for office would be the right fits for their position. The history of the accomplishments of these candidates would also be documented and shared with the public, detailing every good and bad deed done by these potential officials. Once elected, the members would be a part of the newly formed United Nations, which would serve as the governing body for all mankind. The organization, formerly known as the Order of Modern Knighthood, pledged themselves to the UN on one condition: that they were allowed to survey every area outside of home security from that point on, holding vigil with their angels until the Vespa had been upgraded with surveillance equipment, so that they would no longer have to keep watch over the planet themselves. This also included the insides of many commercial buildings, especially governmental buildings, claiming that human beings had proven themselves unworthy of the privacy that they once held and taken for granted. They would serve as the official military of the UN and would continue to watch over and protect the planet without interfering in politics, stepping in only when there was a dire need or reasonable proof of corruption within the UN's government had surfaced. They were known from that point on as the Knights of the UN Order, or the You-Know Knights, although some affectionately called them the Unholy Knights. With ethical and trustworthy political leaders and a military force which focused primarily on defensive tactics and non-lethal force unless extremes called for such involvement, the Earth was ushered into its first known world peace, and the people flourished in technological advancement and financial gain, making the upcoming 22nd century the first documented golden age. Well, that's all for now. I hope you guys enjoyed this segment. Stay tuned for more. Stinger, out.